July 6th. Our Letty called this morning. I listened to her, but couldn't let her know I was here. My voice would have terrified her. At times, I make noises which don't seem human, and my mind is letting go. I try to remember the past, my daughter, but I can't. Instead, I think of death. Always death.
Hey, neighbor, how long has it been since you had yourself a big, hot, screaming earful of forgotten horrors? Well, that's too long. Pull in close now for a crepuscular half hour or so of the Forgotten Horrors podcast with your hosts, John Woolley, Michael H. Price, and my own self, Wolf Brand Jack.
When you come up from the dead and the hall, you make a romance. When you do the thing you shouldn't do.
And thank you, Wolf Brand Jack and Michael H. Price. We're glad to be with you again for another Forgotten Horrors podcast. And this time, we've got one that's really kind of comes from that. A lot of people call it the era of the nightmare picture. Films like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and Let's Scare Jessica to Death. And even Lamora, I think, even though it's a period piece, has got that sort of vibe, but it's also kind of a hippie kind of thing, too. There's a very dreamlike quality to the whole deal. Do you agree, Michael?
Very much so. It's almost a Lovecraft story.
It almost is, isn't it?
Yes, it really, in some ways, it's not true Lovecraft, but it's a better, shall we say, interpretation of Lovecraft than the much larger film, The Dunwich Horror, from just a few years previous.
Are you thinking mostly of just the emphasis on the horror set pieces, or how are you seeing the Lovecraft connection there?
Specifically on the entrance into the town that people would be better advised to stay away from.
And also I think probably, Lovecraft also sometimes did not, what's the best way to say this, did not emphasize character and emphasize horror instead. His characters were sometimes not particularly good.
Yeah, no, not particularly good in spirit or good in the writing of them.
That's right. That's right.
The Lovecraft character kind of, they tend to be passive.
Yes.
That is, protagonists.
Yes.
The antagonists are anything but passive, and but they're not the sort of people you'd want to get on an elevator car with either.
No, not at all. And these people really, with a couple of exceptions maybe, aren't either. We should go ahead and give a little bit of a synopsis now. And I don't know, Michael, I'm going to start giving you some of that heavy lifting on synopses on this, because this one is just, okay, I'll give it a shot. Mariana Hill, who actually is probably best known for being in being the star of High Plains Drifter with Clint Eastwood,
Sure.
Which actually happened just a couple of months before. That film was released just a couple of months before Messiah of Evil, which
Right.
I'm sure people would have gotten some sort of cognitive dissonance watching High Plains Drifter and going right to Messiah of Evil. Although there is a dreamlike thing in High Plains Drifter. It's very dreamlike, isn't it?
Certainly is.
It's about as horrible as horror laden as anything that Eastwood did. But she has lost track of her father. He stopped communicating with her. He's an artist and played by Royal Dano, as it turns out, and lived in a place called Point Dune. And so she drives to Point Dune and goes to her dad's house and encounters basically three hippies that are in town to try and unravel the mystery that lies in this little town of Point Dune. at least that's as nearly as I can tell, that's what happens. It's a guy and two girls, and the two girls are Joy Bang and Anitra Ford, both
Sure.
very familiar to B movie fans. The guy, I guess the guy, the best thing, or the thing that we remember him mostly, Michael Greer,
Yeah.
was in Fortune in Men's Eyes. That was in the stage play with Sal Mineo, and also then in the movie, and probably people know for that. He was also in The Magic Garden of Stanley Sweetheart, and with one of our favorite actresses, Angelique Pettijohn, in The Curious Female, that weird R-rated science fiction picture. Anyway, he played Queenie in Fortune in Men's Eyes, but here he's this really nattily dressed kind of drifter hippie boy, seems to have a lot of money, has a kind of a weird background, maybe an international background. He hints at that. And he's traveling with these two women, one of whom, Joy Bang, is just pretty much the archetypal hippie chick. And then Anitra Ford. And then a bunch of stuff happens, and most of them get killed. The end. I guess that's pretty much it, right?
Not much story there. And
No.
coming from Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz, who would go on to do bigger things, it's a kind of a surprise that the story is more atmosphere than narrative.
And it may be because, and I believe I read this as I was researching for our podcast. I believe it was Anitra Ford's blog that said that the film was never actually completed. And she said, as I recall, a French filmmaker bought the unfinished picture, recut it, and put it out. And boy, that would explain a lot, wouldn't it?
That would explain a lot of the European-style cutting. Of course, there obviously was an attempt to affect an art film atmosphere in the production originally.
You think so? Even before
I think so. From the very beginning, and the resemblance to many of those French, Italian, purportedly based on Poe pictures that surfaced at the American drive-in theaters in the mid to late '60s. That seems deliberate. Thinking about pictures like the one that was known in America as Terror Creatures from the Grave, for example, like that. The various castles of fill in the blank,
right?
And I'd have to go look up their original Italian and sometimes French release titles. The kind of picture I'm talking about.
I know exactly. Yeah,
and it also happens to be pretty much what I think Ivan Reitman was doing with Cannibal Girls.
Was that about the same time? That was early '70s too, wasn't
right
it?
about the same time, yeah. And that whole kind of a Manson cult environment that, of course, wouldn't have happened if not for those events. The pictures picked right up on that, as if they needed something additionally about the hippies to exploit. That Roger Corman hadn't twisted inside out already. So it's a well, of course, it's a weird picture. What do you expect a picture called Messiah of Evil to be?
Right.
It has a very pretentious, kind of a big words Lovecraft type narration. It has a very jarring encounter with an albino fella played by Benny Robinson early in the picture. And you're looking for set pieces. This has got them. I think you might be. I think you might be lost if you're looking for coherence. Should I say, if I may be so bold? But the directors and co-writers Willard Huyck and Gloria Katz generally came to deal in more bigger things. The Indiana Jones franchise, for example. Let us not fail to mention Howard the Duck, which
Let's not.
no, which has its charms if you can get around the bad animatronic effect.
Right. Well, this was their first picture together, and they're both in it. You know, Gloria is the ticket taker at the movie theater, where, for my money, the greatest set piece in that picture happens with Joy Bang. And by the way, I should mention Joy Bang. That's apparently her real name. I'm going to get off into the weeds here a little bit, but her name was Joy Winter, and she married a guy named Paul Bang. And Joy Bang is allegedly really her name. The last I could find, she'd left showbiz and she was working as a nurse up in Minnesota. But at one point, Michael, she was linked romantically with Keith Moon.
Huh.
So that, talk about some the different degrees, the 6 degrees there. But she was in that Filipino picture, Night of the Cobra Woman for New World, and was the star of that. And then one of my all-time favorite pictures, which I just now thought of this, we ought to do this sometime, Joey. I'll do Pre-Mades All in a Row sometime. I love Pre-Mades All in a Row.
Well, yeah, sure.
Well, that's not a bad picture to do at all. Let's kind of keep that in mind. And we had Mariana Hill, of course, was in this, and she was also in Blood Beach. And Anitra Ford is mostly remembered by a lot of people who aren't like horror and B-picture geeks like us. She was one of the first 2 of the models on The Price is Right.
No kid.
She was a model on The Price is Right when Bob Barker was on it. And I remember when Invasion of the Bee-Girls came out, which was one of her pictures, and it was not, it was not the wholesome family entertainment that Bob Barker presented. But I remember she was still being a model on The Price is Right when Invasion of the Bee-Girls came out, which would have been in 1972. Wow. So there's 3 women in this that B and Z movie fans of the early 70s, late 60s will remember. And I think of all of them, although a couple of them all of them suffer pretty grisly endings, I guess, not to give too much away. But Joy Bangs has got to be the most terrifying of them all. I don't want to oversell the set piece in the movie theater, but am I overselling it, or is that really just a really good scene, Michael?
There are some really, really good scenes, and this is probably I'm partial to the jolt that you get out of the albino trucker at the but that business in the movie theater where things build so gradual.
Yes.
I've been in theaters like that, and again, not to give away too much, but I've been in theaters like that where it seems you, the customer, are the only one in the building.
Yes.
Kind of good and kind of weird. And it gradually starts, the crowd, such as it might be, starts filtering in. And the more people come in, sure do hope these people are just here to see the movie. And as it turns out, watch the film and find out for oneself. That's the best advice, probably the best advice we can ever give on this program.
That's exactly right. And we always try not to give too much away, but I'll tell you, on the marquee, it's of course, it's supposed to be ironic, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. But, Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye was a great little novel by Horace McCoy.
Oh yeah, and a great little rhythm and blues song out of New Orleans.
Yes, it absolutely was. It absolutely was. But the movie they actually see, and it's not entirely clear whether it's a trailer or not. It looks like a trailer. Is a Sammy Davis Jr. film, a film that has Sammy Davis Jr. as a sheriff in it and that is actually a real film called Gone with the West.
Wow!
And it was also distributed. Now, see, this is the kind of the connection here. International Cine Film Corporation was the theatrical distributor Messiah of Evil, which is also known as Dead People, and it was also the distributor for Gone with the West, which actually had a good cast. James Caan is the star of that, and Stephanie Powers is in it, and Sammy Davis Jr. plays this character called Kid Dandy. And that scene, what she's watching as this scene develops, what Joy Bang's watching in this theater, is so unusual. I mean, you would think maybe they'd have would have thought, well, let's do a horror movie and make it a little creepier, but instead it's this goofy, just full out kind of Sammy Davis Jr. shooting people. It's very what's the term cognitive dissonance comes to mind. It's it's really that one. Also, we must mention it's great to see him. He doesn't have a whole lot to do. My research, a couple of places said that he only was on the set for one day, but he does a wonderful job with that. And it's just, and apparently, I thought this was a really obscure picture, and then I started researching. And looked on, for instance, IMDb and some other places, but IMDb, there's like dozens of reviews on IMDb. Plus, in 2009, there was a documentary, a 22-minute documentary made called Remembering Messiah of Evil.
Whoa.
Now, I've not seen that. Have you seen that?
No, I've missed that one.
Well, I don't want it. I'll hesitate. I won't say the old line. I didn't see it, but I didn't miss it. But I would like to. I would like to see that picture. And apparently it has Willard. And how are you saying his name?
Willard Huyck.
And it's Huyck. And I got to tell you, Michael, every time I see that, I think of your comics from the Gone World series. You use that word. Almost every story that you redo, you have that word in there, sometimes dozens of times.
When you're at a loss for dialogue, nothing fills the gap like a good hip.
That's exactly right. But apparently he and his wife are both in this. Now, none of the actresses were in it, but he and his wife are both in it. And I think a couple of the other people on the crew, but I don't know about it. Perhaps someone who's listening has seen it, and he can write to the Facebook page, our Forgotten Horrors Facebook page about it. I'd like to know a little bit more about it. What's your overall estimation of this picture?
Plenty of atmosphere, some lovely set pieces, and some very credible shock value moments. The atmosphere lingers. There's not that much story to hold the attention, but the atmospherics and the portrayals, very good portrayals. Joy Bang is, she's typecast for life, but she plays that free-spirited, kind of, you hesitate to say hippie chick. That's too dismissive, but her timing was perfect for that typecasting. Yes,
it was.
It's a lovely array of established and basically genre stars who really never made it beyond,
right?
But who nonetheless give a very good accounting of themselves. And
Mariana Hill almost did. She almost made it beyond that, and she was not able to because after High Plains Drifter, she settled back down into TV guest starring roles, and then of course Blood Beach and stuff like that. But it's a very interesting picture. Some of the reviews that I saw indicate that, and the first time I saw it, that was when Joey and I watched it in preparation for our podcast. The last, 10 minutes when I saw it the first time were out of sync, wildly out of sync. And somehow or another, somebody's come along, and where did we see this, Joey?
The second time we watched it on YouTube.
On YouTube. And somebody's come along and changed it around and put it back into sync, and everything's in sync now at the very end. So if you saw it a long time ago, chances are you saw that print that was out of sync in the last part of it. It's no longer.
That would be a consequence of the rather ragtag editing process.
Yes. But it's certainly worth a look, and we want to, I think, probably recommend it. But I'm like you. It's interesting. It's a kind of an artifact. And
Yeah.
I told you I probably wasn't going to say this over the air. I'm going to say it anyway. Joy Bang reminds me so much of my first wife. It was hard to separate the two. So that clouded a lot of my thinking about it, especially the scene in the theater. But if you like. And again, it is like Let's Scare Jessica to Death or Lamora or Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. It's got that real dream-like. And what is the line? I had it written down over here. The line that the voiceover that Marianne Hill has at the very beginning when she's driving to try and find out what happened to her dad. They say that nightmares are dreams perverted. And this is a perverse kind of a dream, I think.
Yeah, very, very self-evident, but not often regarded in such terms. Well, the film also has the distinction of being, I would think, only the second film, not the second film to be shot in Venice, but the second film to be shot in Venice, California, with the phrase "of evil" in the title.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
Well,
Tell us more.
Orson Welles' Touch of Evil.
Oh, wow. That'd make a double feature, wouldn't it?
Both using Venice locations.
Now, were any of the Beach Party films shot around there?
I'd have to go back and
I'd have to check it too. I didn't mean to ask a question that we'd probably have to research to find out. It seems like I had it in my head that there was a Beach Party film that was shot there too, but it wasn't "of evil" in the title.
The qualifier is the phrase "of evil."
It wasn't Beach Party of Evil or Surfboards of Evil. Hey, Michael, what have you got? What do you got out these days that we can direct the listeners to if they'd like to?
We just released the new true crime book.
Excellent. Tell us about that.
Wanted in America. It's a factual, impeccably well researched, if I do say so myself, collection of Dodgers or fugitive posters from the collection of the Fort Worth Police Department. And
nice.
Tarrant County College. It's a local production in that the source material is from Fort Worth and the publisher is TCU Press. But of course, these Dodgers cover nationwide scope, and nice reunion of a bunch of us from the old rewrite desk at the Star Telegram back when that publication was still a real honest to gosh newspaper.
A real newspaper.
Yeah, and the lovely University Press edition called Wanted in America, and had a lot of fun digging up these cases. One of which involved the detective who while he wasn't working on our case, also is the guy who cracked the Herman Mudgett serial murder case in Chicago. So you run across surprising things, and it's always fascinating to go back through the newspapers from an earlier time.
Absolutely. And people can get that. All you have to do is, actually, what we should just probably say is just go to Michael Price on Amazon.com, and you'll find that and a lot of things, as well as the Comics for the Gone World. And, of course, all of the Forgotten Horrors books, which seem to be going to town. We're getting orders on those, and I'd like to think the podcast is helping that. We really appreciate that.
Naturally.
Everybody who wants to. And I have my little stories with Robert Brown. We're getting some very good press on those and some very good reviews on the Cleansing trilogy. The third one should be out, not quite by the time this comes out, but it's imminent. And the first two are called Seventh Sense and Satan's Swine, and they are available. They're set in the 1930s, and they're epistolary. Letters being sent by a guy up in the Arkansas Hills in 1939 that is out for the WPA trying to get some stories from old people together and runs into a big nest of weirdness. And so that's what we've got going, and we would appreciate it if you would like to support this podcast, you can do so by, if you're interested in any of the books that we have, by just punching that button and buying them, and we'd be delighted. And coming up next, let's talk next time about a film based on a pretty famous horror novel. You know what I'm talking about? Fritz Leiber.
Good gracious of mercy.
Let's take a look at the first book, or the first movie, that was adapted from Fritz Leiber's famous novel Conjure Wife. Weird Woman, one of the Inner Sanctum mysteries that Universal did in the 40s with Lon Chaney Jr. starring in all of them. It's really my favorite, and it's really good. Now, Burn Witch Burn, of course, came along, about 62, 63, somewhere in there, 61?
That was in the early 60s, yes.
And I think there was even a third film based on Conjure Wife, although it was not, it didn't acknowledge its source material, if I'm remembering my research. But I really like the Universal horror B-picture people that are cast in Weird Woman, and I think it really does a nice, quick job, and delivers pretty well. Are you an Inner Sanctum fan, Michael?
Oh, definitely. Including even the final non-universal Inner Sanctum,
which was
Inner Sanctum.
Was that Columbia? That was Columbia.
No, that was a little independent job. In fact, we discussed it in one of the earlier Forgotten Horrors.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. It was quite an amazing run of pictures. There were 6 Universals, and then that kind of 7th one-off, which is the only one lacking Lon Chaney Jr.
Who takes the male lead in it?
You know, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, the wonders of instant research, and of course, it helps to have that. It was Charlie Russell. Charles
Russell. Okay.
With Mary Beth Hughes as the femme fatale. The beauty of having all this instant research at close hand is the result of George Turner, the original Forgotten Horrors founder. George Turner and I worked very hard some 30-odd years ago on compiling the definitive American Film Institute catalog. And now it's right there at a touch.
Right there at your fingertips.
So the 6 Universal Inner Sanctums. I'm partial to Dead Man's Eyes, but Weird Woman is. A lot of people tend to dismiss those pictures as throwaways.
Yes,
and they become indignant when they notice that Chaney Jr. is playing a suit and tie character when he was pretty much a blue collar type. But he slicks up well, and these qualify very nicely as film noir.
I think Weird Woman as well. I always loved Ann Gwynn. I just thought Ann Gwynn was terrific. And Weird Woman, Lon Chaney Jr., of course, is a college professor. And something that people may have a little bit of trouble with, but I think he does. I'm a big Lon Chaney Jr. fan. I think he does a great job. So we'll chew that one. We'll pour over that one next time. And until then, we want to say thanks to everybody who listens. We've got Joey, talk to our producer, Joey Hambrick here. If people want to comment, they can go to the Forgotten Horrors podcast group on Facebook. Okay.
Post whatever they want. If they have any suggestions.
All right. If they have suggestions, that's right. We do have a suggestion going to be coming up in a couple of months from our friend Stephen Hafner, the publisher. But we're going to do that once he gets a new book out. And so we'll be doing Weird Woman next time. Until then, Michael, thank you. It's always great to visit.
Delighted.
And we'll be back before you know it.
Won't be long.
that nightmares are dreams perverted. I've told them here it wasn't a nightmare, but they don't believe me.